Hello, today we're going to be talking about urban communities, suburban communities, and rural areas. First, we're going to discuss urban communities. Take a look at these pictures. I see a lot of tall buildings, and it's very crowded. In an urban community, the buildings and people all live close together. Next is a suburban community. In a suburban community, the buildings and people are more spread out than in a city. Usually, you can find suburban communities near a big city. If you take a look at these pictures, you can see that there are houses, lots of them. They have yards, there's a few trees. Okay, these are different from urban communities. Our next one is rural areas. A rural community is very spread out and has a lot of land. You can find farms in a rural community. If you take a look at these pictures, you can see that there are crops like corn or beans or wheat. You can see that there are a lot of trees. And you can see that there are not very many houses. Okay? In a rural area, you'll be able to find tractors and farm animals and barns and very few people. Okay, now that we know that there's such thing as an urban community, a suburban community, and rural areas, we're going to talk about the differences. Here's our first one, urban. Urban communities have tall buildings, they have little to no trees, little to no grass areas, and they have a lot of traffic. Also, they have a lot of people. It's very noisy in an urban community, and it's really crowded. Okay, there's not very much open space in an urban community. Next, we're going to look at suburban communities. In a suburban community, there are a lot of houses, but not very many tall buildings. There's more green space, there's less people, and it's not in the city. Usually, suburban areas can be found right outside of a city. So you don't have to drive far out of the city to find a suburban community. Okay, so these are different. These are different because urban communities have tall buildings and suburban communities do not have tall buildings. They have a lot of houses. Urban communities have little to no green. Okay, that means there's no trees, there's no yards. But in suburban communities, you can find yards and trees and plants. Okay, urban communities have a lot of traffic. Suburban communities don't have that. Okay, it can be a little bit busy, but it's not traffic like in a city. Okay, it's a little bit more spread out in suburban communities. The last thing that we talked about was the rural areas. Okay, in a rural area, the houses are spread out. There's a lot of space between houses in a rural area. Okay, in rural areas, you can find crops like corn and beans and wheat, things like that. Rural areas are away from the city. That means that you might have to drive many, many miles to find communities. They're super spread out in rural areas, okay? And also we talked about there are farm animals in the rural areas, okay? Why can't farm animals be in urban communities? There is definitely not enough room in a city for farm animals. They don't have grass, they don't have area to run around in cities. Let's take a look at this picture. What do you see? I see horses, a lot of grass, a lot of trees, barns, okay? If we're thinking about suburban, urban, and rural, What type of community would this be? If you're thinking rural, you are right. Okay, here's my next picture. I see lots of buildings and they're very close together. I don't see very many trees or grass. Okay, what kind of community is this? If you are thinking urban, you are correct. Here's my next one. I see houses and I see yards and a couple trees. I don't see any tall buildings, but I also don't see any farm animals here. What kind of community is this? If you are thinking suburban, you are right.